The minimum wage is not enough to live on in Australia. It's approximately $915 a week before tax. Agree?
I'm going to agree.
I'm going to disagree. You go first.
All right, $915. Let's break it down. We're accountants.
Yeah.
All right, it's me, and I've got a wife and a couple of kids. I'm going to live in a unit in Maryland. That's $500 a week. My kids go to public school. That's fine. I can't really drive a car, can I? Because it's too expensive. All I make is $920 a week.
Yeah.
I get $400 left. I go to the markets to buy my fruit. I buy very little meat because I can't afford too much meat. I can't have the internet, right? Because that's expensive. I'll catch a bus. That's fine. My kids get subsidized buses. Education's free. Doctors are free. You know what? I'm going to change it. You can live on the poverty. You can live on the poverty line, and yes, you can survive on $920 as a family.
Yeah. All right. Well, you stole my thunder because you just proved that you can live on $915. But like, obviously, what's the downside, right? We spoke about this before. Most people want to basically have a house, pay a mortgage. They want a car that they can own. They want to send their kids sometimes to private schools. They want private health insurance. They want to go on a holiday, like to Fiji once a year, Bali, something like that. So when you start stacking all that up, what do you reckon realistically someone needs to earn a year to live that lifestyle? Say in Australia, let's say you got 2 kids, wife, 2 kids. What's that household have to earn to live that lifestyle?
Okay, am I living in Maryland or am I living in Concord?
Average Sydney home. I think the median in Sydney is about 1.4 million.
1.4 mil. Yeah, say Maryland. You're buying a nice house in Maryland. You put a 20% deposit. You need, say, $1,500 a week repayment. Another $1,500 to live on, including the car.
Yeah.
Cheap holiday in Bali. $3,000. So let's say it's a single income home. $3,000 after tax. Yeah. The guy you need to have a $250,000 package. To live.
So you need 250 grand. Is that between the two?
Between two.
All right. So if you got 2 people both working and making 125,000 a year each, you can live the average Australian.
Just
live the average Australian dream in Western Sydney.
No fancy clothes. No new iPhone. Just.
All right. But okay. I keep a very keen eye on real estate data.
Yeah.
And I see every single auction price that goes every weekend. We've got a drop in clearance rates. So auction clearance rates are down to like 40% at the moment. But still, what the stock that is selling, I see prices ranging from 1.4 million all the way up to 3 million. How are people in Australia affording to buy homes for 2.5, 3.5, $4 million?
A lot of the people buying in that range are like me and you, John. We've been working for 20 years, right? Yeah. We've bought cheaper property. We've sold them. We've upgraded. We're on a reasonable salary. And we might have had a windfall here and there to be able to afford a $2.5 million. I don't see many young couples in their 20s on saving a 20% deposit on $2.5 million, $500,000 plus stamp duty, having a home loan of $1.9 million. No, man, it's old money. It's money coming from the parents, right? If you get that boost, lovely. You get that chance. Or you've just made a reasonable amount of money, bought and sold a few properties in the past, had a windfall or two on a great salary. That's where you have to be to be able to buy a house. You've got to take the steps. It's a game you play. Unfortunately, no. I finished my degree. I'm going to go work for 3 years. I'm going to save up a deposit and go buy a house. In Maryland. Nah, doesn't happen anymore, unfortunately.
Let me paint a scenario for you. I come from a family of 6 kids. My dad comes from a family of 6 kids. His dad comes from a family of 8. I think great-grandparents come from like a family of 12. And then what we've got now in Australia is the average woman is having like 1.6 kids. So it's a diminishing population for basically citizens having kids. But we're bringing in migration to offset that. If you have like generational Australians having less and less kids, then they're passing down to their kids their houses and their assets. It means like you're going to set up 2 classes, the haves and the have-nots. So if you come from, you're an average family living in Marrickville, and your parents die, they leave you $5 million behind, and there's 2 kids in the family. Now you have $2.5 million each. So you've solved your housing problem. But then you've got migrants that coming in from Nepal, Colombia, other parts of Asia, Africa, wherever they're coming from, some parts of Europe. They're coming with $0, and they're working in the gig economy. The Uber drivers, Amazon drivers, doing all whatever they can do, working at cafes to get by. It just seems like it's inevitable that there's going to be the property owners are going to generally be like a property owners class on one side, and then on the other side you're going to have like a working or blue collar class that can never afford to buy property in Australia.
There's some truth to that, right? It does feel like there are two classes, the haves and the have-nots, but it's only when it comes to Sydney property, right? It's only when it comes to property, right? Even the have-nots, they can still break in. You can still buy an apartment for $500,000-$600,000. There's still government initiative, the 5% deposit scheme, to get them into units or into a cheap townhouse, right? You can jump that class into a property owner class, right? But in terms of, if we're talking strictly, I want land with a house with a couple of 100 square meters of house, that's a hard goal to achieve, right? And if you do come from that family where there's two kids, mum and dad, they've worked for a long time, they can guarantee your loan to buy a property, or alternatively, they can give you a whole lump sum of money, right? That might come from the grandparents for you to be able to afford the house. But yes, I agree with you. There's help. But John, when it comes to everything else, I feel like it's still a fair playing field. We all got iPhones and Samsungs.
And flat screen TVs.
We all got flat screen TVs.
Yeah.
We all have
aircon in our cars.
And aircon in our houses, right? And it's not like one person's got a car where you wind down the window, one person has the buttons to wind up a window. We all seem to be living fairly well. But some people get a Rolex, some people get a Casio.
Some people don't have watches and don't need them. I don't think you do need them. But that's a different story.
Not in today's day.
Just the last thing on the property before we go to the next one. We jumped on realestate.com this week. I narrowed down a search. I selected units, Melbourne CBD, and lowest to highest. And I noticed 1 bedrooms are starting in the high 3s to low 4s. 2 bedrooms around 500,000. And being a Sydney resident my whole life, I freaked out because if you go probably 25 kilometres west of Sydney City to buy a unit that's 2 bedroom, you might find one for 500,000. But in the heart of Melbourne CBD, there's units going for $500,000. Why is Sydney and Melbourne so different in your opinion?
It's demand and supply, right? There's plenty of supply in Melbourne, right? We're fairly landlocked in Sydney, right? We can't go south, right, southeast, because we've got a big national park and they don't want to release that land. And you go north enough, you're also going to hit another national park, right? And they don't want to release that land, right? And we don't seem to be building units fast enough, and we haven't done it as well as Melbourne. Planning in Melbourne, I think, is far superior than planning in Sydney, right? And they can sprawl in every way, shape, and form. You can go north and buy cheap property. You can go west and buy cheap property, and you're still 20 minutes from the city. Yeah. Over here in Sydney, 20 minutes from the city is ridiculously expensive. Yeah. So they've planned a lot better in Melbourne. They've got more opportunity for land in Melbourne, and they've done the unit thing a lot better than we have. It's still fairly reasonably priced to live in Melbourne, which is a little bit of a shame. Yeah. So it's like the discussion we're having, the have and have-nots in terms of property. That really applies to Sydney and to an extent Brisbane. Melbourne, it's still possible.
Still for a game. And the interesting thing about the unit market in Melbourne, having developers as clients, you sort of come to understand the cost of building a unit. You're potentially picking up some of those units if you're buying them now at less than the actual building cost of those buildings.
John, I remember pre-COVID, we were talking about one client that were building at about 250, 260 a site plus GST for something like it was fairly standard, fairly cheap, right? It was nothing fancy, but you're building at the mid-twos a site. That same property now, right? You're building at 450 to 500, 450 a site to 500 a site, right? For the same thing, just you're talking about 70% more just for the build. And if you're building in Sydney for 450 to 500, right, a unit, and you can buy a unit in Melbourne, in the city, finished, for 450 for 500 grand. It's crazy.
I actually looked at some new units being built and sold in Wentworth Point, and 2-bedroom unit high rise starting at like $1.3 million.
Ouch.
Do you know what I mean? So when you see that 10, 15 Ks out of Sydney CBD, and then you see 2 bedrooms in the heart of Melbourne, part of it, the opportunist in me thinks, man, why not just go buy 10 Melbourne CBD units? But then obviously supply and demand, and the statistics I've seen lately showing that there is like a huge supply. So there's no guarantees if you do something crazy like that, it's actually going to go up in value. So you really got to, do the maths and see if it's going to be worth it as a, something you'd hold, taking into account the rent return and the interest. But anyway,